What's up, everybody? So we have Jason Esteves back on the podcast from Seitron Americas, and what he's going to do is take us through the advanced version of the three-part series. We've done basic, we've done intermediate, now we're doing advanced, and we're going to talk about the stoichiometric curve in combustion and how perfect combustion is kind of like a theory. It's not really a true thing. We're going to go through that with Jason here on this episode, guys. This is the HVAC Know It All podcast. I'm your host, Gary McCreadie.
Welcome to the HVAC Know It All podcast. Recorded from a basement somewhere in Toronto, Canada. Your host and HVAC tech, Gary McCreadie, will take you on a deep dive into the industry, discussing all things HVAC. From storytelling to technical discussion. Enjoy the show.
Jason, we got round 3, man, as anticipated and as promised, and you have the stoichiometric curve in the background. So
nice.
I guess we'll have to put this one on video so everybody can see this nice little curve in the background. But for those that are listening, driving along in their vans, we'll have to do our best to sort of describe what we're seeing in sort of the curve form behind your head there. So go ahead, man. Let's kind of get to it. Advanced combustion analysis.
Well, this is my most favorite, and anybody who's ever been to one of my classes, this is my most favorite slide in combustion because I go through all of the things from what's oxygen, what's CO, how it's created, and all that kind of stuff. And then I get to this slide and I go, all right, everything we talked about for 40 odd minutes, it's right here. It's on this stoichiometric curve. So anybody who knows combustion, this is kind of what happens in combustion, right? And for a long time, and what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of the curves and what we're looking for and what the lines mean. But I don't really care what type of system you're running on, an 80% furnace, a 90% boiler, whatever the case may be, everything follows the stoichiometric curve. That's how it all works. So for many, many years, and it's funny because if you notice, I'll start here. Let's start with the basics. A curve is two-sided, right? Because there's only one direct straight line that you see on the curve right in the middle, and that is called stoichiometric combustion, thus the name of the stoichiometric curve. Stoichiometric combustion, which I'll give you props for because not everybody can say that properly. So when you introduced it, nice job, Gary.
I practiced like lots before we came on.
Yeah, it's one of the things I do in the class. I go, anybody want to take a shot at this? I got $5, whoever can say it right. But normally it doesn't happen. But anyway, stoichiometric combustion is in essence perfect combustion, right? That's what stoichiometric means. It's a theory. It means that you would have the perfect amount of oxygen with the perfect amount of fuel to create what we call stoichiometric. It's not possible. The reason being is because when you do combustion, when you're performing a combustion process in any point, what combustion needs, and guys always tell me air, well, air's part of it, but what combustion needs is actually oxygen. So oxygen is a part of air, but if anybody owns an analyzer, they turn it on and they normally see 20.9 or 21%. If you think about it, that is all the oxygen that's in the air. That's what you and I breathe right now. Less than a quarter of the air we breathe is actually oxygen. Less than a quarter, but it's also what you need for combustion. So if I don't have 100% pure oxygen, how can I have 100% pure stoichiometric combustion? It's impossible, right? That's why it's a theory. So there's 3 different types of combustion: stoichiometric, which we know is a theory, good combustion, and incomplete or bad combustion. What we try to do is get on the good combustion side. So if you can't be here living on this beautiful straight line you see in the middle, which we know we can't, there's only 2 sides of this fence that you can live on. To the left is excess fuel. This is where you get high levels of carbon monoxide, inefficiency, unburned fuel because we're running too fuel rich. And then what we have the air side, the right side of the curve. This is where you get the highest efficiency range when you're on the air side. By the way, Y analyzers also have a reading on there called excess air. They want to know how much excess are we using to have good combustion. So, and the reason why we don't use the old wet kits, if you remember those anymore, you know, those old CO2 shakers, is because
I've never personally used one, to be honest with you.
Well, anybody, especially on the oil side, know what they are. That's kind of how combustion got started, using those old wet kits. And we would do draft and temperature, but we would only look at CO2. Only. And that's kind of, as an industry, where our mind goes to CO2. Well, I got to tell you something. About 95% of the analyzer manufacturers out there, there's nobody that has a CO2 sensor. And the reason being is if you look at my curve at the top, where you see the CO2 and efficiency curve, they're in essence one and the same. CO2 tells us the efficiency, but the curve is the problem. So the reason why it's called a stoichiometric curve is because, and the problem we have, if you notice what a curve does, you can actually have the same CO2 number on either side of the curve. So just if we only look for CO2, we're not potentially seeing other problems, and the flame could potentially look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you don't know what side of the fence you're on, which is, again, why analyzers have two sensors. Your oxygen sensor to tell me, am I running on the air-rich side and how much excess air do I have? And a CO sensor to tell me, based on safety, if I'm on the wrong side of the curve. I don't really care so much what CO2 is anymore. And if you, more and more manufacturers now on the furnace and the boiler side, if you look at the setup guide or the installation side of the manual, they normally give you two numbers. Some will give you CO2, but they'll also give you either oxygen or CO to look at also. They don't just go by CO2 anymore. And the reason being, I want to make sure what side of the stoichiometric curve I am on.
Makes
right?
sense.
You could be on either side.
Yeah, makes sense.
What a manufacturer does in that installation manual when he says, okay, on high fire, on low fire, on this and that, I want to see between this number and this number for oxygen, or this number and this number for CO2, or I want to be below 100 ppm on CO. The reason being is, you see this shaded area in the stoichiometric curve? It's on the air-rich side, right?
So we're talking, for the guys driving in their truck, we're talking about on the right side of the curve, which is the air-rich side. That's the good combustion side, right?
Exactly. But not, if you notice the curve, it's just barely on the air-rich side, not too much, right? Because we don't want too much air. But that, what we call the highest efficiency range. And if we get that boiler, furnace, a water heater to get my CO in a certain number, my oxygen between a couple numbers, my CO2 will be at its peak, if you notice, and my efficiency will be at its peak while it's running safely. So to give you an example, right? On let's say a 90% boiler, if I look at a new condensing boiler, my oxygen should be between, let's say, 5 and 7%, to give you an example, right? Some manufacturers are a little bit different, but let's say it's 5 to 7%. If you see the curve or the highest efficiency range, I know I should be between this number and this number. Combustion is always a range. Am I going to be in this good range? CO, typically 100 ppm or less is a good range, but some manufacturers on high fire will give you 150, 175, whatever the case may be. But if you notice where my little curve is for CO in that shaded area is very small, and that means it's 100 ppm to 0. So it's okay to have some CO. But if I get my oxygen and my CO in this range, my CO2 will be at its peak. The other reasons why we look at this is because the funny part is when you're doing, like, let's say natural gas or propane, right? When you make it super simplistic, when you make adjustments to the fuel, pretend you're a dot on this little oxygen line. If I increase the fuel, what does my oxygen do? Decreases. If I decrease the fuel, you increase the oxygen. And what you're doing when you make that adjustment is to land the plane where the manufacturer wants, where my CO will be low, my oxygen will be a little bit I'll have a little bit excess, but that means I'll be running at my peak efficiency. But if I put my probe in the stack, and guys will call me and say, well, I have 0 CO, so it must be running clean. And when I ask, okay, what's your oxygen? Because that's the king in combustion. They say, well, it's 10%. Well, guess what? If you look at the curve, your CO 0, but I'm all the way over here where my oxygen is way too high, almost double the amount if I'm at 10%, if I should be between 5 and 7. So I'm here, and look what happens to my CO2 and my efficiency. On a curve, what does it do? It drops.
It's dropping, yeah. So if your oxygen, so for those that work on large burners and stuff like that, if your oxygen's too high and you have your air is adjustable, that's probably one of the reasons why it's too high, maybe, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Your air, whatever you're using to adjust your air is open too much, maybe?
Absolutely. And you just said exactly what our industry says all the time. Air. And I keep saying, yes, air is a part of it.
Yes,
what guys don't
oxygen.
understand, oxygen is what you need. And
yeah.
Guess what else is in there? nitrogen.
So then why do they call it excess air instead of excess oxygen then?
If I had $1 for everything that I wanted to change in our industry,
Yeah.
I would be
Would
a
you change
very
that?
rich man. I would.
Oh,
I
would you?
would.
Okay.
Yes, I would say excess oxygen. How much excess oxygen do we have? The difference is, the reason why we use excess air is because there's other things in air that could become a problem, like nitrogen. So nitrogen, which by the way is about 78% of air, right?
Mm-hmm.
We breathe 78% nitrogen. Well, so does that boiler. Well, at higher temperatures and, you start getting into the commercial side, you're also going to start increasing NOx. So, there's a difference between what residential guys look for and what commercial and industrial guys look for, just based on, what in the afterburn of that air, oxygen, nitrogen, argon, all these other things, what are we looking for in the exhaust to tell us what we want to know? So I jokingly always say there are 2 E's in combustion. Efficiency. A lot of us in the HVAC world live in the efficiency world, meaning we look at oxygen, CO, CO2, how efficient, how safe is it running? And then the emission side. And those guys typically care less about how efficient a boiler is running, but more importantly for them is what does the emissions look like? I need to create an emissions report. So when guys ask me for NOx analyzers, I immediately know they live in the emissions world, but both are happening, right? It doesn't matter what you're burning, whether it's a boiler or your automobile or an engine. It's all mixed with air and fuel. So it's just where we're trying to do. Now, one of the things, not to make a plug for my own analyzer, but I have to describe something. This is one of the reasons why we put that Pro mode on here with, if you notice down at the bottom, the stoichiometric curve. Because if you set the boiler for the oxygen, CO, flue temperature, CO2, and all that in that green zone, which is this high efficiency zone, you'll be okay.
Interesting. Okay. So can you actually take us through, you said you didn't want to give your analyzer a plug, but you're giving us all this free information. So tell me how that Pro part of the analyzer, the Novo, how does that, you called it the Pro Zone? Is that what you called it?
We call it the Pro mode. There's different modes.
Pro mode, sorry.
Yeah.
Walk us through exactly what that is.
Sure. So anybody who owns an analyzer of any sort, this is kind of what they see. Oxygen, CO. I'm going to turn the pump on for a second so it stops flashing. But oxygen, CO, CO2, efficiency, losses, flue temperature, air temperature, the delta T. Almost every analyzer looks that way, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter what brand. It's kind of a little bit about what we talked about last time, like where now the technician in the field becomes the doctor. He has to take those readings, decipher what is good and what isn't. And sometimes what scares me after teaching combustion for 20 odd years is when I go in front of a room full of techs, sometimes I go, okay, you're running a 90% boiler and you're doing an 80% furnace. Where should your O2, your CO, your CO2, your draft, your temperature, where should they be? And a lot of times, fairly enough, I get blank stares. Not because guys don't know, it's because it's kind of unfair. There's a lot of different equipment out there. There's guys that have to do all different types of stuff, and you have to remember so much as a technician. So how do we make this stuff easier? So what my guys can do is we call it the Pro mode just because it's a mode on here, but I call it the combustion assistant, which means that instead of looking at the numbers and you having to decipher it, if I go into my Pro mode, I can literally choose equipment and pick from a long list of different types of equipment. 90%, 80%, 70% atmospheric water heaters, condensing water heaters, furnaces, or the like. You can even add a specific range based on your manufacturer's requirements, because sometimes they'll be much tighter than what I give you as a general rule of thumb.
Yes.
Right? So you can name the boiler, name the furnace, you could adjust your oxygen to whatever you want, CO, CO2 to their specs, name it, go back, and it'll always be there as part of your selection. But now if I go to, let's say, a 90% boiler, and I go back to that screen, it's going to tell me where, once I start reading, because right now you're seeing a few things in red because we're not taking a measurement, but as long as we land in that green zone for all those parameters that I don't need you to worry about anymore. If you follow these specs, you're going to have that boiler running right here. And I've been doing this for a long time. I train. This is what I'm very passionate about, and I do this in our industry, I'm not just trying to sell an analyzer. I am really trying to make our industry better. That's why we train, right? We're trying to get guys to do that.
Get it. I had a conversation with a young dude, Zach, who owns his own residential HVAC service company, install company, and he's only 26 years old. And
Awesome.
we were talking about micro trainings and how, I think it was with him. I believe it was with him. Hopefully it was with him. But we're talking about how the manufacturer needs to get involved and step up and start doing these micro trainings of their tools, because so much equipment goes out there and people are not installing them right. They're not using the tools right. And then they come back and say, oh, that tool or that equipment's a piece of shit.
Oh my God.
Because
All
they're not trained on how it operates properly. And
Yes.
they don't get it. They don't understand it. And they just throw it away. And I'm not dealing with this anymore. So just imagine if you could go into every shop and spend 4 hours with their guys and go through everything we've talked about on our first 3 podcasts and get them properly trained on combustion and on a specific tool. Yours is the Novo, and then send them out into the field. Just imagine how much of a difference that would make. So much, right?
That is why, like I said, I'm very passionate about our industry and been doing this for a long time, because I deal with the techs. I deal with I'm from the manufacturer side, so I understand there. I deal with the distribution side, and I also, deal with the other manufacturers. So, for instance, I've been to almost every boiler manufacturer in the country over my years, because I like to learn how a new piece of equipment is going on. What are some new things out there? Because I have to teach combustion. So, one, does my analyzer have everything they need? And number 2, what's going on in the industry?
Yeah.
And of all my years of doing this, you know what I've never heard? Oh, Jay, look at this boiler. What a piece of shit. We're going to sell the hell out of it. It's going to be great. Never. I never heard that.
Yeah.
But then when I get out into the field, you know what I hear all day from almost every tech under the sun? This fucking boiler. What a piece of shit. And you go, okay, what were the readings at that piece of shit? And all of a sudden, oh, they were good. And you go, no, what were the actual numbers? Similarly to like a doctor, when you go to take your blood work, you have a range that's good for cholesterol, for white blood cells, for red blood cells, for all these things, right? And if it's out of range, that your doctor is usually trying to do something to prevent further problems later. That's what we're doing. And so with the manufacturers now in the manual giving you a range of what they want to see when you install them and what I'm doing here is to say, even on older equipment, on newer equipment, get it in the range. You don't have to worry about knowing every number for every system anymore. But the easier we make it, the easier it is for me to train, the easier it is for techs to understand, and the better equipment will run. What a concept.
Yep. 100% agree. I want to take the conversation to something that maybe we should have talked about earlier, but I'm going to bring it up now, is the smell that can come off a burner, right?
Yeah.
We would call those aldehydes. Is that?
You could call them aldehydes. Yeah. There are other, but that's the most common. Yeah.
Okay. So I need to ask, and everybody out there they've smelt it too. Like you get that weird kind of gross smell coming off the venting of a burner. What is that from? Is that from poor combustion? Is that from flame impingement? Like, is it all of the above? Like
all
what
the
is
above. It could be a couple different things, right? Yes, of course. Yeah, if you're running on flame impingement or dirt or dust, or on the oil side, anybody who's ever dealt just because I'm from the East Coast of the U.S., you have that what we call the oil smell, and what that is sulfur, and you have NOx, the very acidic gas that's creating because you have 78% of nitrogen in air. And then that also some of the stuff in natural gas that, guess what, the processing does is they put a scent in natural gas so you can smell it even before it burns, right? So what do you think happens to it after it burns?
Yeah.
So, there's a variety of different things that it can be. Anytime a flame runs anything that's not just fuel and air, you're going to have a scent, whether it's hitting something or whether you have flame impingement or dirt or dust or anything like that. There's a variety of different things it can be. But, smells of what I get the most of is, I can smell bad combustion. And you go, yeah, okay. Just like guys that say you can smell CO. I promise you cannot.
Yeah.
So,
okay. All right. So yeah, because I've seen that argument. I've seen that
Sorry.
argument lots. I just want to throw this in there. I've seen it lots on social media. Yeah, I can smell CO. No, you can't. Yes, I can. Well, no, those are aldehydes you're smelling. That's not CO. So,
or a carbon-based fuel, right?
Yeah.
Like it's carbon. So if you burn carbon, it will have a scent. And everything, whether it's natural gas or oil or propane or anything, they have carbon in them.
Yeah.
That's how CO2 and CO are created.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, no, I can guarantee you one thing. Whoever says that they can smell CO is lying. That is not friggin' possible. Sorry.
Unless they're those Tesla bot with a built-in CO detector in their brain, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I don't walk around anywhere without my personal CO detector for a reason. Why? Because guess what? I've been in combustion for a few decades. You don't know when it's going to happen or when it's in the air. So no.
Okay, so I'd like to spend the next few minutes, end this off with this, because I believe this is part of advanced combustion. NOx, what exactly is it, and where does it come from?
Sure. So NOx is it's called nitric oxide. Okay, it's the oxygen and the nitrogen, obviously in the air, burned at higher temperatures. So the nice part, every combustion process under the sun has NOx as a byproduct of combustion. You'll see newer car engines, boilers, furnaces, that if you actually look at the label, it says low NOx, because in certain areas of the world, here in the US, places like California, it's really hard for a manufacturer to sell into the market that's not running very, very low NOx. And whenever you talk NOx, you're talking emissions. What do you emit, right? So I live in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, every year I have to take my automobile into an inspection station to get the car inspected, but to also have what we call an emissions test, right?
Yep.
So if I take my car and my wife, let's say, takes her car, they don't give a shit if I get 2 miles to the gallon and she gets 100 miles to the gallon. Nobody cares. Remember the 2 E's of combustion? That's the efficiency world, right? That's the E.
Yep.
What they care, and they have their own analyzer, they put the probe in the stack and they measure the NOx. They actually have a NOx analyzer where they're measuring what your car is emitting. Because what NOx can do is it's a very acidic, dangerous gas. And it creates very big environmental problems. Whatever your politics are, it does. So it causes acid rain. It causes all types of pollution. NOx is the problem when we talk about fossil fuel burning equipment. It's not how efficient it is. It's the NOx that you're creating. Now, what high efficiency condensing equipments do is because they run at lower temperatures, typically in the exhaust, there's much, much less of it. The higher the temperature you go, the more NOx you create. That's how that works. So that's why it becomes a little bit of a bigger issue on, bigger commercial industrial boilers, because you're running 300, 400, 500, 600 degrees Fahrenheit in the exhaust or in the stack. So that's kind of the difference. Now, here's why it's a big deal in the HVAC market. Does anybody ever hear of what we call recirculation, crosstalk? You're venting materials, your O2, your CO, your CO2, the NOx that's in there too, when they all should be piped perfectly to get outside, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But unfortunately, what we see is some what we call recirculation, where sometimes those pipes aren't piped correctly outside, and we start pulling back in those byproducts from combustion, right? So you're kind of vented too close together. There's all different types of reasons why, but if you don't vent properly outside, instead of bringing clean air to the boiler, you might be bringing carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, but also that acidic gas called NOx. And once you start bringing that back in, that's where all the problems occur with things like burning out and rusting out igniters and heat exchangers and all that type of stuff, because the acidity in that gas that we should be going out is coming back in and it's recirculating back in. So there's a variety of reasons why, not to get on a soapbox, is why I don't like PVC on the exhaust side. I don't like it at all. Well, number one, the temperature is not rated for, Schedule 40 is not rated for exhaust temperatures on a boiler or furnace. Number two, the acidity that is in that NOx starts eating away and discoloring and eating away at that material. It's made for plumbing. It's not made for exhaust. So, that's another.
What are you talking about? System 636 that's specifically designed for venting of high efficiency appliances? Or are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about standard ass Schedule 40 PVC piping that I see on a daily basis.
Okay.
That is not, it's not meant for what it's being used for. That's all, we could do a whole podcast on venting materials if we wanted to, but that is something that, going back to that acidity and the NOx and the byproducts, it's not made to withstand that kind of stuff over time.
So I guess anything under 7 is acidic. Everything above is alkaline. So 7 is neutral when it comes to water. So on the pH scale, it's a 2. That's how acidic it is. It's almost like fully acidic.
Wow.
So I want everybody to look up this curve if they're not watching. And you know what? In my intro, I'm even going to say, hey guys, before we get into this, pull up a stoichiometric curve, look at it, so you have a visual in your head, and then we'll talk about it. We tried to explain it as best we can without the visual, but this has been pretty cool, and I've enjoyed all of this, Jason, for sure.
Me too. And I just want to put it out to your followers and listeners too, because like I said, I'm very big on education. If anybody wants to reach out to me, or to you, and want a copy of the training presentation where they have the curve, they have all the things, I'm happy to share this stuff.
What's your email address? Shout it out.
So it's my first initial J and then my last name EST, V like Victor, ES. So it looks like Esteves, but has an S at the end, at SeitronAmericas.com.
Perfect. Okay. So I can leave that also in the show notes of the podcast. So if anybody wants the presentation, they can get it. Amazing.
Or
Amazing
anybody
stuff,
has
man.
any questions. I don't care what analyzer you have. I really don't care. You can be using a Testo, a back, or whatever it is. If you have a question on a combustion, me and my team here, we have 24 hours, 7 day a week, 365-day on-call support. So
perfect.
Give us a call.
That's amazing.
We're happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anytime. Appreciate it.